All right, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to talk about adding interest to our shots, our paintings, our compositions. We're going to look at a few different ways we can do that. Sometimes when we have our painting, everything's placed in compositionally balanced, beautiful. We went through all the contrasts and made our stuff look beautiful. But there's this one element of adding a little bit more interest that takes our work just to the next level and adds that extra little bit to make it stand out. And we're going to take a look at how we can do that. Let's jump in. I'm going to use an example of something I just did recently and see how it actually practically applies. We're going to talk theory for now, just like we always do. Take a look at the examples, masters, and then I'll show you a practical portion of where I use that knowledge into my actual piece. All right, so let's take a look. Adding interest with light and shadow. One of the big ways, probably the biggest way you can add interest is with your lighting and how we can use lighting and shadows to add that little bit of interest back into our shots and just take it to the next level. So let's take a look at a few different ways. There's tons of ways you can add interest. We're going to cover light and shadow in this round here. So sunlight or light source can be used, shadows can be used, reflections, and all of that can create areas where we can break up large shapes and add further interest. And we're going to take a look at how that all applies. But these are the general guidelines we're going to be looking at today. All right, let me grab my brush here. And get a hard brush. All right. Okay, so we have a scene here. I believe this is a scene from the movie Balto, and I really like the beautiful shapes that are broken up here. So say for this example, we have a sunset scene, and I'm just going to paint in. This is a sunset, and we have this falling in our set, okay? So we have now a big, large sunlight patch falling in, and that's pretty cool. We have a nice large shape, it's focused in on our ship there, and perfect. We're looking at where we need to be. Now, how can we use what we know, adding more interest to this, to break it up and make it look, give it that extra bit of pop and beauty? By breaking that shape up, when we talked about break up large shapes, if we look at that light as one big shape, you want to break up those large shapes into smaller pieces and even design it compositionally within that large shape. Then we took a look at some of the micro compositions we were talking about. You can even break this light shape up into micro compositions to give it a little bit more interest. And you can see now how much more beautifully it falls on this landscape. And we can use the landscape and the snow piles to add that interest, ups and downs and crevices. And as the light falls on that beautiful ground, giving a breakup to that large shape, adding interest. So this is kind of what we're talking about. In this instance, we took a look at sunlight and then breaking up that large shape. In this example by Dice Tsumi for Monsters U concept painting, we have characters that are reading outside together, studying for something, and in this illustration, he's put them in the shadow, because who really wants to sit out in a summer day reading a book in sunlight? You burn, you sweat. It's not a comfortable feeling. So the scene would require them sitting in the shade somewhere. Now, how can we add more interest to two characters sitting in the shade? Playing this beautiful dappled light on them, breaking up that large shape, and the large shape here would be the shadowed, cast shadow from a tree, from a building, whatever it is. That's one large light or shadow shape that we can then break up with dappled lighting to add interest and beauty to this summer scene at school. Here's some examples from Alex Nino we've taken a look at a bunch of times already. This time we're using the same dappled lighting. And another good example of using this technique is a lot of people, I used to have a lot of students that I'd see assignments from, and they would never use the entire environment. What I mean is, if you thought about your composition here, and we had a bunch of trees and rocks, there's a whole other world out here as well. You know, there's other trees. If you think about a camera and you're just shooting, well, these can also influence the scene that you're painting. So think about that. Think about cast shadows from external sources, from something outside the frame that can break up cast shadows, reflections, or even light to break up shapes. So in this instance, it's something off screen, casting a broken shadow from the treetop. So taking a look at this large, if we didn't have this cast shadow, we would have one massive light shape here, right? What that cast shadow allows us to do is to break up this large shape into what you see now, the dark against light. And it's nice that there's no color involved, so you can really see that breakup. That shadow breaks up that large shape, adds a level of interest that wasn't there before. And that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. Another thing in this same illustration or drawing is the reflection, helping to break up that large river shape or body of water by adding reflections, breaking that surface up with a little bit of detail, adding a little bit more interest there. So there are a lot of ways we can add interest. We're talking light, shadow, and reflection. In this instance, there's shape breakup. There's a lot of things, like, for example, that might be, this is maybe another topic or another video, but having a large fallen tree here to serve as our bridge. It's kind of straight, it's got a nice shape to it, but where can we add interest to even this shape right here, this log here, to give it a little bit more sex appeal? And by adding a few twigs to break up that shape, even in a log shape, the silhouette adds interest. But that's another episode. I just want you to kind of be aware of it for now. We're just talking about these three here. Another drawing by Alex Nino. I believe these are all from Mulan. Some gorgeous drawings came out of this this film here. Okay, so we're taking a look at this guy now. We have cast shadow here, again, breaking up the scene. External, something from outside here. My beautiful drawing. Casting its shadow down and helping to break up what otherwise would have been a big, flat, white shape. Light shape. And just breaking it up with a little bit of cast shadow there. And not only that, breaking up, but it's also serving as a compositional element to help us take a look at our characters in the scene. So a lot of different reasons why we would use this technique compositionally, and to break up large shapes to then further make it look interesting compositionally. So that's where that adding interest element comes in. There can also be used as composition elements. The same thing here, you kind of see the same things repeating on this kind of technique of adding interest, of using light and shadow, and as a compositional element, this cast shadow just happens to point to our character where we want the viewer to look. And of course, this would have either been a big shadow shape, obviously from a cast shadow, but how can we break up that cast shadow from an external mountain, of course, going off into the distance right here, is by adding a patch of light that just happens to break up that shadow on the edge of that cliff or mountain to fall right in the surface perfectly, of course, to strengthen our focal point. A painting done for early concept work for Beauty and the Beast. I'm not sure who the artist is, or I would give him or her credit. Not sure in this instance, but same kind of thing. This time we can use reflection and light kind of reflecting on that ground as well. So there are a few things breaking up that plane, breaking up this big, otherwise kind of monotonous kind of shape, boring. But now we've added interest to this floor, giving it a surface quality as well, being reflective, and adding interest by reflecting light into it. We're going to move on a little bit because we got a lot to cover here. A painting by Craig Mullins. Beautiful lighting, works great. You know, everything's beautifully balanced, and probably would have worked even without these this cast shadow on the floor. But that cast shadow adds a little bit more of an interest right there, breaking up this big, otherwise shadowed floor by throwing light on it, breaking that up, adding interest, and not only that, but helping our composition that has strong kind of perspective lines, and this kind of goes against those lines to give us even more interest. All right, a painting by Paul Lassane for Open Season. Again, we're using the same things here. Probably getting bored of hearing it, but it's good to hear it over and over again, and different ways the artist or the master used it to break it up, because these are all different ways. Here, of course, if light is falling on the floor, great way that we've seen, cast a shadow, break up that light, cast shadow, break up that light shape. Even trees, right? Trees, big shapes. How can we break up that shadow? By casting or throwing light on it, breaking up those shapes, and you can see casting shadows on those lit faces, otherwise would have been a fully lit, like, you know, if you did this, sure, you know, it works. You got some nice light, soft kind of falling on those trees, no problem, still looks good. But how can we add a little bit more interest and a little bit more, you know, sex appeal is like what I like to call it, and bam. Not only that, but serves as a composition element, drawing your eye into the frame. All right. This is an example, something else we talked about by using, you know, we talked about light and shadow reflection. We talked about breaking up silhouettes and shapes. And this is seeing it in a different way, seeing negative shape now. And this is, again, a topic, but I thought I'd include it in here for you to see. So this is the negative shape between these two tree trunks. How do we break that up and add a little bit more interest to this painting? Well, let's break it up with a tree kind of bent, whatever force has bent this tree trunk in this way. It kind of helps to break up. Look at that one, and now we have two interesting shapes. So all kinds of ways to add interest. This is breaking negative shape, which coincidentally is also breaking up large shapes, which are in this instance a negative shape. Here you go again, light. We've seen this a million times already now. Break that up. Look at that cast shadow kind of breaking up that wall and maybe emphasizing where our hero could walk in to that room. Here is another instance of using reflection. So we have an overcast day. We can't really use light and shadow to our advantage. What can we do to add a little bit of interest? Use that wet, rainy day look and drop reflection down to break up that light shape. And coincidentally, obviously, create a strong focal point for our viewer to look at. Here we go with another master we took a look at in the other episodes, Edgar Payne. Let's see how this master, uses it in his traditional painting. Seeing that big light shape on the ground, it's kind of ugly. Let's break it up, add more interest. Break up that ground, breaking up large shapes. Same thing here. Take a look at how this cast shadow breaks up these large, massive light shapes in the cliff there. And again, breaking up that light plane on the ground. using cloud shadows. These are cast shadows from, this is, let's say, the cliff, but there has to be something else here that's casting this long shadow. So using that external features really helps. And we'll take a look at a practical way I used it in the scene, in one of my scenes. Cloud shadows, another thing that people probably don't use that often. Cloud shadows, dropping reflections on the ground, shadows on the ground, and breaking up that massive expanse of light that's falling on the terrain here, because we don't really have anything close. It's a really massive environment. We don't have cliffs and rocks to cast big shadows. The scale of this environment is huge. So what can we do? We can use cloud shadows, or I mean, you could also have a massive rock here too. We don't know, casting this big shadow. Again, kind of dappled light, or shadow cast by maybe some external trees outside of the frame, breaking up that ground plane, that big shape of light. All right, so we've taken a look at how this is done using all these examples. Let's take a look at a practical example. You say, well, that's great, we've covered it, but how do you use it? Okay, well, let's take a look. So here's a scene that I just recently finished. This is the diffuse pass in my render, and the first light setup I had was this. So this is just my key light. I have a sun direction pointing down and hitting these shapes. So not too bad, right? And if I screen this on top, you're going to see how this affects the scene. I'm going to make it a little stronger so you can see it better. So not too bad. Looks like it's sunlit. It's gray. We have sunlight hitting these shapes. You could be happy with this. This is a clear sunny day and it's fine. It's, it works. But I looked at it, I'm like, I'm not too happy with it. Where can I add interest? It's okay. There's nice lighting in there, but I need a little bit more interest in this. So I went back and I took a look at, I remembered that what really helps to add interest is breaking up the shapes. And I started looking at it, I'm like, you know what, this kind of bothers me. It's kind of flat and nothing really interesting happening in here, and just kind of boring lighting. How can I make this interesting? And just like we talked about, I went in there and I started casting shadows. And I'm going to, I'm not sure if I have the 3D scene open, but I wanted to show you guys how that happened, but it'll take a little long to open. But anyway, now take a look at what just happened. So if I turn this on and I put it back to normal, you can see the difference in breaking up light shapes. I saw this was a little too big. I really want to break that up. Same with this, and the body of water too is kind of big and boring. What can I do? Let's break it up. I knock down the foreground. I'm like, I don't really need the attention to be here. This isn't the point. The foreground isn't the point of this scene. I kind of want the interest to kind of fall on this big guy here. So let's knock that to shadow. Meanwhile, keeping a little bit of light here and there dappled. Let's break up this massive light shape that I had. It's kind of gross and ugly. Let's cast some shadow. This isn't interesting to me, this patch of light on the water. I don't really care for it. I don't really need it. It doesn't help anything. I want my light shapes to be in this area, our biggest things. And this kind of leads our eye to this big light shape here. And these kind of support like the big shape, and we talked about small shapes. So if you take a look at the light shapes, it's kind of like that versus something like that, something similar. Big shape, even in light, versus small. Always thinking about where we can break it up. So I used elements, and the way I did it, of course, is by picturing, if I picture my scene being bigger, and in 3D, of course, you can move around with your camera, I placed another building here off screen to cast shadows onto this bridge, breaking that up and then continuing further to break up even that light shape there and hit the back bridge right there. So using that element, using what I learned from those masters, and I applied it directly to my piece to help it become from an average lighting, it's okay, to a lot more interesting, breaking up those big light shapes, adding more interest by having cast shadows, adding depth even to it as it kind of cascades across it, breaks up that light shape in the water, and then breaks up that light shape on the bridge as well. So that's how I used it practically. And then when we screen this back on, take that off, sorry, we have a lot more interest. And then I went further and actually said, okay, I don't have time to go and tweak the lights so much where I want to get rid of this. This serves no purpose, kind of useless. Paint it out. And that's great why it's having 3D passes. You can just paint it right out. This patch of light right here kind of bothered me. It served no purpose. I could just paint it right out. So anywhere I can even go in here and kind of softly take it out if I feel like it's too distracting. Things like if I find this patch of light distracting, it doesn't serve a purpose, I can go paint it out right here. You know what I mean? So kind of cleaning up those light shapes as well, making sure that this isn't distracting. Why do I have in this shadow area a patch of light? It's distracting me. It's creating unnecessary contrast. Get rid of it. Bam, done. And you can do that in 3D. It takes a lot more tweaking and maybe adding black cards, to block the light to come in. A lot more back and forth rendering. And when you have a scene this complex, I don't have a supercomputer where the renders are a minute. It takes a few minutes to render, and I just don't want to waste time. So I knew I could just paint it out right here, which is great because it's on a separate pass. All right, so there's a practical example. Adding interest with light and shadow, using cast shadows from external sources, dappling light, breaking up big, large shapes of light, shadow, and using reflection to also break up shapes. All right, add that little extra bit of sex appeal to your shots while using it as compositional elements to direct the viewer's eye. All right, so as always, if you dig the content, share it with your friends. If you find value in it, share it. If you think other people will find value in it, share it. If not, don't. Subscribe, there'll be more. We'll see you next time.